Wayne Pelkey, Wayne Pelkey.
Pelkey. And what is your birthday?
November 6, 1931.
Wow, so your birthday is coming.
Yeah.
So how old are you going to be? 89?
89.
You look like a 69. Huh? And tell me about the poncho you are wearing. What is it?
This poncho was one that I wore while I was on Christmas Hill in Korea in 1953.
1953.
1953.
Uh-huh.
In fact, in July 15th, 1953, the Chinese had attacked our company and Company E with overwhelming odds, and I and three of my other squad members were rushing down the trenches trying to come to their aid. That's when a mortar round came in and killed my platoon leader, John Lung, an Afro-American from Alabama, Jay Bridges, and a young man from Pennsylvania who had just come into my squad 2 days before. I tried to talk him into not going out, but he was gung-ho and wanted to go to help save the company next to me. Mortar round came in, killed three of them almost instantly, except the Jay Bridges, the Afro-American, and he was bleeding mortally. I held him in my lap and had a gauze on his throat. He looked up at me and called me Daddy. I kissed him on the forehead.
Oh.
His eyes went glassy. He thought I was his daddy. Here I come from Barrie, Vermont, that we never had but one Afro-American in the city, and he was a tailor that I knew used to shorten my trousers. So it's a small world, and if anybody ever calls me racist, I'll punch them.
So that is the poncho on the day of you were wounded.
Yes.
It was 6th of July.
15th of July.
15th of July of 15th of July 1953.
That's right.
So it was just 12 days before the armistice was
12
signed.
days before the armistice.
And is this real?
This is real. In fact, I think that's probably what helped save my life, because it blew me out of the trench. I think it was the air from the mortar that got under this and blew me out of the trench while it killed the other three.
Wow, that's amazing. So you told me before the interview that this poncho was modeled for the Korean War Veterans Memorial Park in Washington, D.C. Is that right?
Yes.
Tell me about it. How?
My good friend Frank Gaylord was the designer of the Korean War Memorial, and he was talking to me because I used to visit him. He only lived 3 streets down from here, and he said, I'm going to make the memorial, and he says it's going to be 24 little stainless steel sculptures. And he asked me about the patrols, and I told him that it was not the way they portrayed it as 24 to 30 men going out in the patrol. I said I never wanted to have over 7 with me because it was too much of a risk. And
so you have the magazine where that we can see the real statues of the Korean War veterans in the memorial park.
Yes.
Can you show that to me? So your poncho was modeled to make the statues in the Korean War Veterans Memorial Park in Washington, D.C.,
That's
right?
right. In fact, this number one that's shown here, he's carrying a BAR, Browning Automatic Rifle.
Yes.
And interesting enough, that's what I was carrying that day.
Huh? Huh. So your everything, your honorable service has been the model for the Memorial Park.
Yeah.
That's an honor. Hold
Yes.
on, please. And your friend, the Frank Gaylord, was the one who designed the Memorial Park, right?
That's right.
I know him for sure. So if I can meet him, I will be love to talking to him. Thank you. Put it outside there on the table, please. And by the way, that is the curriculum book that we published based on all the veterans' interview of Korean War.
Yes.
And we distributed to the teachers all over the world.
Yeah.
And it was published by the National Council for Social Studies, NCSS, the biggest social studies teachers organization.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, so let's go back. So you born November 6, 1931, so you're becoming 89-year-old. Where were you born?
Here in Barry, Vermont,
Right here.
on a Friday when the whistles were blowing for the granite workers to go home for lunch.
Tell me about your family when you were growing up, your parents, father, mother, and your siblings.
We grew in a very humble household near the granite quarries. At that time, there was no indoor plumbing or running water in the houses, and it was kind of hard living. But my folks always put the best they had for me. Our household, we had 2 bedrooms, and we had 6 adults and 2 children living there.
So what did your father do?
My father was a hoist operator, operated the derricks that took the granite in and out of the quarry.
Oh.
And he was pretty industrious. He always had 3 jobs. He did that. And then he was a plumber, carpenter at night. And that's the way we got by. We probably had the 2nd electric refrigerator in town. And my mother was a pretty hard worker too. She was graduated first in her high school, and she played piano with the silent theaters. And she would cry if I came home with a report card with anything less than an A.
Oh.
And
You can put the hood down. Yes. All right, good. And so, what school did you graduate? What high school did you
I
graduate?
graduated
and when?
from Spalding High School.
Spalding?
Yes.
S-P-A-U.
Paulding
Mm-hmm.
in Barry, Vermont,
When?
1949.
49. So that's the 1 year before the breakout of the Korean War.
Yeah, yes.
And you were born in 1931, so it was 2 years after the Great Depression in 1929.
Yeah, yes.
How was life at the time? Was
Well,
it hard?
Depression was pretty tough, but my folks were very kind to people. Like at that time, the town, a lot of the people had died of diphtheria from the open wells, and
You can look at me.
oh, okay.
Yes, yes.
And so usually my father was pretty generous. He'd always give things to people and so forth. And while the WPA was digging ditches for the sewer in the town, invited 2 people in for Thanksgiving dinner. And I went and visited, my mother and sister and I went and visited them in 1948. And he then was CEO of the Seaman Savings Bank in New York City.
Wow.
And his wife was the vice president of Avon Products. And they really thanked us for what we'd done for them, because they were all living in a tent city doing the work.
So you were very lucky. Your family were very lucky, right?
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Lot of hard work. And I says, when when I got out of high school, I had a scholarship of $500 to go to the university, but I couldn't go because things weren't that good at home, and I didn't have the $300 additional that I needed.
Oh.
So I went to work in the quarries down the bottom of the hole as a laborer for 49 cents an hour. I worked there 35 years at Rock of Ages and kept advancing up through the ranks. And when I retired after 35 years, I was corporate director of purchasing and traffic for United.
But I have a very important questions to ask. When you were in high school, or throughout the whole education from K to 12, okay, did you learn anything about Korea from the school?
No, I didn't. In fact, when I got drafted, and after basic training, they said I was going far east, and I didn't know that much about Korea, so I went to the local library, and I got a book on Korea and read it. So I learned quite a bit about it and told it to the fellows that were shipped along with me. And most of them had very little idea of Korea. They'd heard of Japan, but never of Korea.
Mm-hmm.
So the most that we knew of it was through some movies they had of 30 seconds over Tokyo, and a couple planes that crashed in Korea, and how they were hid from the Chinese and cared for by the missionaries there.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a lot of respect for the country after that.
So, do you remember the date that you arrived in Korea? When did you arrive in Korea during the war?
I arrived in Korea in March 1952.
March 1952. Where?
And in Busan.
Busan.
We came from Japan to Busan on landing craft.
And when did you leave Korea?
I left Korea in August 1954.
And when did you go back to Korea? You said that you went back,
I
right?
went back to Korea on a 10-day battlefield tour in September 2000.
2000. And who did invite you back?
What's that again?
Who invited you? MPVA?
This was a private tour. They call it Pacific Tours.
I see.
And the one that led it was a professor of Korea University of History.
Got it.
And so it was very good because the bus we rode on was one of a young Korean, and it was all lace curtains inside and so forth. And we went through a lot of the towns where the young children were out waving flags and so forth. And I loved to get out and get down, crouch down. The little kids would come around me and hand me little rice cakes, and I'd hand them chocolate bars. And they were so polite.
So when you revisited Korea in 2000, and when you saw all the places that you were fighting, and also you went to Seoul, right?
Yes.
And every city. Tell me, what did you think about Korea when you revisited in 2000 compared to 1952 and 1954, please?
It was really amazing because I had 47 years of bitter memories of the war. I remember Seoul, there was nothing over 2 stories high, and all I could remember is the poor refugees and little children. I said, with the little children, when we went from Busan up to the repo center, the little kids were beside the tracks, some with an arm missing, leg missing, and we'd throw out the food that we had, the box lunches. We weren't supposed to. We'd throw our jackets out to give them some clothing and so forth. And at Chuncheon was a refugee center, and I still remember the little Korean kids were along the fence and looking for food out of the trash cans. And one GI must have come from a bad home. He went up and he hit one of them. And I went up behind him with my rifle and I said, "Stand back or I'm going to shoot you." I said, "These are little kids. I was brought up to respect them. I know you didn't have a good home." And he looked at me strangely and backed off and didn't do anything. But I love those little kids.
But when you saw the Seoul, 2000, and the Seoul that you saw, 1952 to 54, how different that was?
Oh, it was almost amazing. And I wish every Korean veteran would have the opportunity to go back, because after 47 years of bitter history, I suddenly felt that what I saw was worth it. And it was a good investment. And my love for the little kids continued because my 45th Division was supporting a orphanage in Seoul, and they wanted some money for it, and money didn't mean anything to me, so I gave several months' pay to go there, and 34 years later, my sister adopted 3 Korean orphans, 2 girls and 1 boy. The 2 girls, one of them is now a major in the U.S. Army and a brain surgeon. She could do 4th grade work when she was in kindergarten. And her sister is, I know she didn't come from the same orphanage because she was tall, and I know the heritage had to be North Korean because the younger girl was your size. And very sweet. And the boy, Tom, was adopted by a neighboring family of my sister just for prestige, I guess. And then they wore off and they didn't want him anymore. So early one morning they took him over and gave him to my sister and said, "Will you take him in?" She said, "Sure," because she actually one time had over 50 foster children. So she took him in and he joined the army. He was in the Rangers. He fought in Iraq through some fierce battles. And now he's a computer programmer for Hanover, Vermont, where it's a big college. And his boss was... Dartmouth.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where where the younger girl went to Dartmouth. And she went on a military scholarship, gives 6 years and so forth. And I got some nice pictures I can show you inside. And my sister can show you when she was in Iraq, there was the nurses' tent where they were. There were 3 bunks shown. 2 of them were kind of mussed up. One was neat without a wrinkle. My sister said, "That's got to be Amy's."
You know what? So your sister name is Nancy.
Yes.
And she adopted 3 Korean children.
Yeah.
And so you plant a seed supporting the orphanage in Korea.
Yes.
Now your sister adopted 3 of them.
Yeah.
So Korea has never disappeared in your family affairs.
No, it hasn't. In fact, that started back in when I was over there. I was out with a truck with a group on there emptying trash from the company. And I looked over and there was a little Korean boy there. And I looked, and from my Boy Scout medical training, I could see he had a bad wound in his leg and there was yellow gangrene.
Yeah.
So I got a picture that tells me that the Lord must have told me to do that, because I took that picture. The sun must have been behind me because it showed a shadow from my head towards him. And I went over, picked him up. He started crying. I took my heavy sweater off, wrapped it around him, and presumed we were both crying. And I took him back to the truck and said I'm going to take him back and get treatment. So first time I got stopped was by a big black MP, and he said, "Who you got there beside you?" I said, "I got a little Korean wounded boy I got to take back for treatment." He said, "Take him back to the dump and leave him there."
Oh.
And he took his pistol out, and I said, "Don't even put your finger on the trigger, because I got my automatic rifle pointed at you, and I have 6 shots in you before you can pull the trigger." I got back to the company, went to the company commander, and he was very good. He told me to bring him to the aid station, and they would take care of him. And 6 days later, that same MP had reported me. They called me out in front of the whole company. I was a sergeant at the time. They told me I violated the conditions of non-fraternization. They took my sergeant stripes and they ripped them right off.
Ah.
And I said, "Thank you, that's a medal for me," because obviously you never appreciated family life. And I think it was 6 weeks later that the chaplain had heard about that, and they called me out in front of the company again. The fellow said he was sorry, but they just gave me back 2 stripes. I says, "I don't care, I already got my medal. It's in my heart."
Ah, that's an amazing story. So that's why Korea is blessed and your life has been blessed, because whatever you did to the least of my brothers and sisters, you did it to me. That's what Jesus said in Matthew.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And that's why this is very important to record, preserve your memory. What you did 70 years ago now is coming back with a great legacy.
I can remember every detail of my time in Korea. It's things 2 weeks ago that I can't remember. But even in town, my dentist was served in Korea with me, but he was there doing suturing of wounds and so forth. Alphonse Morelli was his name. And he was a dentist for me and my wife. And my wife grew up in a poor section of the city. In fact, her father left home when she was 8 years old. And she had free dental care by this dentist. He gave free dental care for all the kids that were not that well off.
Very nice.
I wanted him to go back to Korea with me, but he couldn't because he was having health problems at that time. But his best friend that he was served with in Korea was the person that started the television movie, you've heard it, MASH. And Alphonse Morelli was one of 2 people that started that. So Barrie has an interesting history. It's a very patriotic town, whereas 7 miles from Barrie in the capital, a lot of the progressives live, and I'd say the progressives and Democrats, and they have demonstrations every week, defund the police, do this, do that. And in Barrie, everything is opposite. Like just last week I went by and there were, despite all the things they had on Trump, there were probably 30 young men walking around that statue in town with American flags and some that said Trump on it.
Mm.
I said, we believe in the country and we'll work to maintain it.
Yeah. But Wayne, let me ask this question. When you told me that you left Korea August of 1954.
Yeah,
When you left Korea, had you ever imagined that Korea would become like this today, the Korea that you saw in 2000?
not in my faintest thoughts did I ever think I'd go back, because it was so impoverished, destruction, ashes. Right below me up on Heartbreak Ridge was a destroyed city, and I just didn't want to see it, because Korea was, at that time, was worse than anything I'd ever imagined. And
So what do you think about this transformation from the rubble to the Korea that you saw 2000? What do you think about it? How do you put it into perspective?
well, I think I understand it, because the Katusas that I had were so dedicated. And, here they were fighting with the Americans, and I had 3 of them that would give their life for me like I'd give my life for them. And I just felt so bad. I said I didn't think I'd ever want to go back. And then I got something on TV about a trip back to Korea, and this wasn't the one sponsored by the KWVA. It was a private one by Pacific Tours.
Mm-hmm.
And I called them, and the lady was a Korean lady, and we struck up a very nice conversation, and so I decided to go. So I contacted one of my friends here in town after Mass on Sunday, and I said, Wayne Calderer was his name, and he came from a fortunate part of the city. He was a graduate of Norwich University, and he was a retired colonel. Here I was, a retired infantryman. So we went together.
Okay.
And we met another group in Chicago, and there was a General Metaxas, Metaxis, who had fought in the Second War, Second War, Korean War, Vietnam, and he was with the 7th Infantry Division. So even though we were with the 45th, we went with them. And my first glimpse was we flew in a 747 with a Korean crew, and I looked ahead and I saw the pilot was a Korean, and I said, oh my God. I said, when I left, they couldn't even drive a Jeep. Here we were in a 747, and when we landed, it was spectacular. We landed at Kimpo and went down, converted our money, and went to the hotel in Seoul. It was, we went in, and here there were silk curtains, linen on the table. And I said, I can't believe this. I said, how did they do it? And then I realized it's through their dedication and hard work that they lifted themselves up by their shoe straps. And they really made a country out of one that I had last seen as ashes and refugees. And as I went through the first part of Seoul, I saw the citizens there. They all had cell phones, shiny shoes like yours, and dressed well. And the first place we went to visit was a big building. It's on one of the Christmas in July pages. It shows a big hotel in Seoul, and there's 3 signs here. I was the first one to pick it out from the editor. One said Catholic Church, and the other, a big M for McDonald's. And so you kind of had a test of those that read the magazine. I read it from cover to cover, including the ads. And I said I was the first one that picked out that McDonald's and the church. And it just was amazing. So I used to be very active in the American Legion, VFW, and I was pretty good at public speaking at the time. And I went around the state and promoted at that time, trying to promote the returned veterans from Vietnam, because they got used terrible. And I said, I got used pretty good coming back from Korea, because Korea was a forgotten war. No one knew about it. And so my theme was Korea, the war we won. And I pointed out, I said, when you look at your LG cell phone, which I have today, your washing machines, your dryers, and I says, I went to the Hyundai factory, and I says, I can tell you, I've been to Ford and General Motors and Willow Run, and it was more modern than any factory we had in the States. I said, it completely changed my mind, and I found relief. And I never will forget it. And that's why I wish that I would have had more opportunity to organize something here, because I was pretty good at organization. In fact, it makes me proud to think that in that JC table I showed you there, my friend was president in this country, and they worked with General Motors, and I had 5 new Buick cars to drive in the year 1964. And I says, I took my oldest son home from the hospital in one of those. And
so, Wayne, I want to focus on the battle now, because you were in one of the most hardest battle place,
yes.
Heartbreak Ridge and Christmas Hill. So let me ask this question. Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I was drafted.
Drafted. When?
November 11th, 1952.
52.
And that was Armistice Day then. And when I drove...
Veterans Day, yes.
Yeah. No, then it was Armistice Day.
Uh-huh.
And when I drove by that big granite monument that you saw, I said to my friend who was still in town with me, I said, this will probably be the last time we ever see that. And it wasn't, because he stood beside me on the Memorial Day.
So that's you?
That's me.
Wow. You are the cover model.
Yeah, he stood beside me and said, well, we did see it again.
So you already knew that Korean War broke out, and you joined the military, drafted.
Yeah.
So were you thinking that you were going to be dragged into the Korean War?
Well, of course, 1949 we graduated, and then in 52, almost all my senior class of able-bodied men got drafted. Some that were better vision, they joined the Air Force and Navy and so forth, and I wanted to join the Air Force, but my folks didn't want to sign for me. So I went through basic training in
Where?
Fort Jackson, South Carolina. That was a training camp since the First World War.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had infantry tactics. And the one I can really remember, riot control. We were taught to have our rifles with a bayonet. And when people were rioting, you'd march towards them. They weren't going to, when they felt the pick of the bayonet, they weren't going to burn down buildings and steal stuff from the stores. And I wish that they still did that.
So where did you leave from the United States?
I left from Fort Jackson. One of the guys gave me a ride to New York City. I took a train to Vermont. I called 3 of my friends, and I said, they didn't give us any furlough. They only give us one day at home. I said, I know how we can get 2 extra days. We'll fly to Chicago and then get on a troop train. So I organized it with the Northeast Airlines, and these fellows had never flown in their life. At that time, I was doing pilot training at the airport. Later in life, I became a pilot and then had my own plane.
Wow.
And so we took the troop train from Chicago to Seattle, Washington. And we had to sign in by alphabetical order. And I always, at that time, was a quick thinker. I didn't want to separate, so they had that alphabetical order. They had the big list there. So my 4 friends from Barrie, we moved our names all up together. And we got drafted together. They never caught us. And we went on the ship for 17 days.
What ship? Do you remember the name?
Yeah, it was
SS?
It was the Marine Adder. It was an old Victory ship. I think there were 3,500 of us on there. We landed in Yokohama, Japan. Went to what used to be a World War II naval place for the Japanese Navy. And from there we said we're going to Korea, so they took us on a train. They said, don't stick your hand out the window. So I always tested, and I had my rifle. The rifle they gave me, the bayonet was so dull, I said it looked like they'd attacked a tank with it. But I just stuck this much of it out, about 10 inches, and bam, it hit the other train. And I hollered at people, don't stick your arm out the window. And so, we went to landing craft at Sasebo, and we had to stand up in that landing craft tight together to Pusan. You couldn't even pee without peeing on the floor or in the guy's pants in front of you. And we got to Pusan, and I looked, and there was a great big raft with a fellow doing and I said, how can he do that? And I said, that'd take a 100 horsepower diesel engine to do that. So we went through separation there, got on a train, an old steam train, went up to Chuncheon, Chunchon.
Yeah, Chuncheon.
And all along the way we could see Red Cross ambulances, all bullet-ridden, and I said, boy, this is a real war. So
what was your unit?
I was in 40, at that time we weren't assigned. When I got to Chuncheon, that's where they signed us up. And I did it again with my 4 friends from Barrie. For the sign-up sheet, we put all our names together. But fortunately, somebody recognized it, and they put us in different companies. It's a good thing, because probably most of us wouldn't have come back together.
Exactly.
Every one of the 4 that left here came home. And so...
Your unit?
I was assigned to the 45th Infantry Division. That was the Thunderbirds. You see the red.
Yeah.
And I got in the Fox Company.
What
180 Infantry Division.
No, you were in the 45th Infantry Division.
Yeah, the 180th Regiment.
Regiment, yes. And Fox Company?
Fox Company.
Yeah.
And the first place I got assigned to was in the eastern part of Korea. They called it Sandbag Castle. I could look, we're up high, I could look and see the steam trains in North Korea at what was a big park at that time. And so after being there a month, and first night I was there, I saw my first fatality. And that was pretty hard, but I became hard and I wanted to get even. And I did get even. Shamefully, I used to keep track of it and I gave it up after a while. So we were transferred over to Christmas Hill. That was the last big battle of the Korean War. Christmas Hill in the east near Sandbag Cat. No, oh, good grief. Then the western part was Pork Chop Hill, the 7th Division.
Yeah. And then from there you went to Heartbreak Ridge?
Christmas Hill was like from here downtown, from Heartbreak Ridge. That's the one I was trying to think of.
Got it.
And Heartbreak Ridge, surprisingly, wasn't a ridge that was east and west. It was north and south. And so where I was at Christmas Hill, we had with us the Turkish people and the Filipino RCT, Regimental Combat Team. Mm-hmm. And the Turkish, I still remember them, they were fierce fighters. They, instead of hiding, they would get out in the open and make fires, because the Chinese had found out they had big tents, and inside the tents they had ears of Chinese all sewed on.
Yeah.
And we weren't like that. We were in the trenches. The trenches was like World War I. That was bad warfare. And we had a couple generals that didn't care how many troops were. General Ruffner, R-U-F-F-N-E-R, was one. He would want to capture every mountain peak in the area, you know, despite how many troops he lost. So my best friend that got drafted with me from Barry, he was down a little below me in Easy Company, and I saw they really got pounded bad by mortars. And they were being run over by they called it the Capital Campaign. Andy Antipis can give you the full story of that. That's when the Chinese sent divisions to try to make a showing. And what I didn't find out till I went back to Korea in 2000, the Chinese made 7 tunnels under the MLR, and one of them was right behind us in Christmas Hill, and we lost a lot of troops. The first patrol I went out was with Lieutenant John, and we were being shot up from people who were supposedly behind us, and they were Chinese who had gone. That tunnel was, some of them were 700 feet underneath, and they'd come up at night like rats and shoot at us. We never knew that. I never knew that until 2000.
I see.
And there's quite a story. I went through one of those tunnels that had an electric railway through it.
Yep.
And they could transport a whole regiment of troops through there at night in an hour.
Yeah. But so you, as you said, it was one of the last big battle in the Christmas Hill, and you were there. What was your specialty? Were you infantryman or rifleman?
I was infantryman, BAR, Browning Automatic. And that's because that would shoot 20 rounds to the M1, which World War II rifle would only shoot 9 rounds. It was heavy.
Right.
And So that's when it had Chinese were only 500 yards across a valley, like looking up there. And the BAR it was for close, effective fighting, but it had a bipod that you could lay down, put it on sandbags and really look through it. And I became a volunteer sniper.
Sniper. That's a very dangerous.
Yes, it was. And I took out a lot of Chinese.
Do you regret now?
When I go to church, yes.
But that was your job.
It was either kill or be killed, you know.
Right. So what were you thinking when you were in the middle of these big battles at the last stage of the Korean War? What were you thinking? Did you think that you were going to die, or are you afraid? Tell me honestly, what were you thinking?
I never had fear. I would say a lot of prayers, and I said, Lord, if you get me through this, I'll never miss a Sunday at church again. And I still remember a chaplain going down through the trench just before, I think July 14th, and giving communion. All my Koreans, the people didn't believe in God, they all took communion because they thought they'd see me do it, that would save their lives.
So tell me, how you were wounded, where and how? In July 15th, 1953.
July 15th, 1953, part of the capital campaigns, the Chinese were throwing masses of their troops towards us. And Lieutenant John came down and he said, I need 4 volunteers to go with me to try to help Easy Company because they're overrun. The Chinese,
where was it?
Easy Company was probably 100 yards below me.
And where was it? It was in Heartbreak Ridge?
No, Christmas Hill.
Christmas Hill, okay.
And my good friend was there, and I said, I want to go to help him. And I got 3 others from my squad who volunteered to go with me. And I regret that because one of them had only been with me one day. He was a young man from Pennsylvania named Spoonhauer. And he was tall and gung-ho and good-looking. And he says, don't hold me back. I want to go with you. And the other was Bridges, the Afro-American. And we all had VARs because they had a lot of firepower. And John Lung, kept saying John is John Lung. He was a lieutenant from Alabama, from the National Guard, and he never would ask anybody to do anything that he wouldn't do himself. And we felt we needed to back him up. And so we'd probably gone 50 yards down the trenches, and the mortars start coming in pretty fast. And one of them came in, and last I can remember was a ringing in my ears and throwing me up in the air. And when I came down in the trench again, I found John Lung was killed, and my friend from Pennsylvania had been there one day, was decapitated. And I kind of lost my marbles at that time. I was looking all around for his head, couldn't find it. The story's on 56 and 57 in the book, and I had to, the next day, go and carry him on a litter with one other fellow to the aid station. And some fellow from Graves Registration was there, and he said, who is this? And I said, that's Spoonhauer. How do you know? He hasn't got a head. or dog tags. I says I couldn't find either one, but I know who he is. So I had to sign a bunch of papers to verify it. And like I said, Bridges died in my lap thinking I was his daddy. And I haven't had a peaceful night in 67 years.
But you said that you wore that poncho when you were wounded.
Yes.
It looks like a brand new. It didn't happen.
And what amazes me, there's no holes in it.
It's hard to believe that it was original.
Yeah, yeah.
So where were you wounded? Where were you wounded?
At Christmas Hill.
I mean, what part of your body were wounded?
Well, that's the strange part of it. On Purple Hearts, at that time, you only got Purple Hearts if there was a hole in you with blood. But what happened to me, I had a bad concussion. Blood would come out of my ears, my nose, my mouth for 2 weeks. So I was evacuated to the 46th MASH hospital. And after the ceasefire on the 27th, I was sent back from MASH and supposedly for light duty. And they put me for light duty in the trucking company.
I see.
And I said, I don't want to train anymore. I've got all the training I need to kill. I said, I'll never kill again. I won't even kill a bird. That's why I got the big bird houses out here.
So it was a mortar attack from Chinese, and you were just blown off.
Yes.
And then you bleeded, but because there was no hole in your body part, so that you didn't get the Purple Heart.
No, they haven't changed the Purple Heart rule until Iraq, all these roadside bombs and so forth.
Got it.
And but what they did do after the ceasefire, we were all awarded the combat infantry badge, and then they said, anybody have wounds, write it up. And I didn't want to write it up because I said I was still alive. My friends weren't. And that's, I don't regret it, but sometimes people will ask me, how come you didn't get the Purple Heart? And I just don't comment on it. What I did do in my monument up at Hope Cemetery, I don't know what your schedule is, but I'd like to take you by there. I've got the combat infantry badge sandblasted right in my monument. And my wife was very proud of her heritage. In fact, she chased her heritage through, enology, to 1747. And I got it all on the wall in there.
Wow,
in their
1747.
room. Yeah. And so I don't know why this hasn't got any holes in it. I folded it up and I have it in my personal property things in my garage. And I think I only wore it once since, and that was, I went with my son down to Charlotte, North Carolina to a race, and it was raining, and I'd taken this along.
So how do you feel like you are wearing it, the poncho that you wore in 1953 when you were wounded? What are you thinking now?
I feel like it's 5 below zero right now. I got the chills.
You can take it off if you want to.
Yeah, I'd like to.
Yes, please. Yeah. Hold on, let me take it off for you. Yes. I will help you. You should have told me that you've been in cold. Okay. So, let's talk about the day that armistice was signed, the July 27 of 53. Where were you and how did you feel about it?
They evacuated us from Christmas Hill on the 22nd at 27th at 10 p.m. to a place that's alive. It came alive to a place about 12 miles from where we were, and it was one of the few places that still had a lot of trees left, and it was so peaceful. I could hear the birds sing, and I looked up at the trees, and there was hanging down. What is it when they hang down at Christmas time? You get under and kiss your girlfriend and so forth.
What? Snow?
It's just a like a little plant, and they hang down. And I said, I can't believe it. It's peaceful, but we were told we were going to prepare for a counterattack, and we were just in such bad shape that we couldn't have beat our way out of a paper bag at that point. And the Red Cross came around with some paper pads with a Red Cross on it. And I gave it to each of my squad, and it says, write home to your parents and tell them you love them. Never hold back on that. And I wrote my father, and I signed it, Love, Wayne. I think that's the only time that I ever said that in my life, even though I felt it, because it was kind of a manly thing. And 2 years after he died, he was living with his granddaughter, and she found that letter that I wrote him in a drawer. And he thought so much of that because of that Love, Wayne. Mm-hmm. First time I said it in my life. And I think most of the other guys did that too. Because that's a problem with a lot of us men. We're too naive and chauvinist to express our feelings to our wife, you know. Fortunately, I did, because I met my wife through her brother. Mm. Her brother was going with my sister. Mm. And this was after midnight mass, and he came to visit me. And I was pretty somber, I had tears in my eyes and so forth. He says, you can't be like that. He says, I'm going to take you down and introduce you to my sister because she's home alone. So he took me down, and I went in, and I think at the first sight, it wasn't love on first sight with my with my wife. It was with me, because I hadn't even had a steady girlfriend in high school. I never took a girl home to the house, and but her mother loved me at first sight. Oh. And so after that, I got a little story to tell. It says I went with my wife 3 years before we were married, and I finally had worked up a little bit at work, and I was no longer a laborer in maintenance. I was in one of the record-keeping jobs, testing equipment, and I'd made a little more money, so I went and bought an engagement ring, which was like a month's pay. I said I did that once for the orphanage in Seoul. I'm going to spend a month on my pay for something that's a good investment. So I went in the house. She come down the stairs, and I had this in my hand, and I says, Rini, will you marry me? Before she could answer, her mother was in the living room and said, yes, yes. And we always got along very, very good.
Very nice.
And the whole family. In fact, yesterday her brother came over to visit me. He had a very, very tragic life because his wife died in her sleep in bed with him 8 years ago. And he took this death very hard. Never could come over here without bringing something. He took over a bunch of blueberry muffins. I love them. And I said, well, Rena and I always like birds. And I got blue jays and ravens that visit me. They're almost tame. I took it out and I fed them this morning.
Tell me about the book, your book you wrote, Christmas in July.
Yeah,
Show it to the camera up here. Yes.
Christmas,
Why did you name it as a Christmas in July? Because of the Christmas Hill?
Christmas Hill, the last big battle of the Korean War. And that came to pass because one of the fellows that was at Christmas Hill with me was a bachelor down in a city in Long Island. And he was active in the KWVA, which I'd never heard of at the time. He told me all about it and so forth, and I invited him to come up and see me. He came up to see me, and my wife really gave him a good welcome, and he said, we can't let the Korean War die, we got to keep this going. So I spent a lot of my time. At that time I had a cheap computer, and I remembered him say, "Why in hell are we here?"
Yeah.
And I wrote with my name there, the Korean War, why?
Why? Yes.
And
What is your answer? What did you write there as an answer?
well, I wrote a 7-page answer to it about all the battles and why we're there, and we had to stop the communist aggression. And if we don't stop it here, we're never going to stop it anywhere.
Right. So, why did you write this book, The Christmas in July? Very, very.
It started with that one fella from who was a fire chief down in Long Island, and we got together and we come up with the names of 19 of us that were at Christmas Hill, and we all became part of the book. And I've got an autobiography of all of them in here, telling who they are, what they did, and so forth. And that one of Antipas is right at the.
Did you wear it?
Yes.
Yes, that's a good idea. Hey, it looks good on you.
There are only, of the 19 of us, there's only 2 of us that are left. And so we've got all our autobiography and everything that we had, what we thought of the war and so forth. And we tried to make a joke of some things. Like, I got one picture that I took. I always got a kick out of the Korean families of the water ox and pulling the wooden plow and so forth. So I got one picture of a farmer trying to coax his male water ox onto his female ox, and I got a footnote that says, a new Korean tractor. And in the book that I've got, and I'm going to give you, I've got my accounts separated from all the other 19 on there. And then I got one here, the worst day of my 21-year life. That was that July 15th, and where I detail that. And then in some of the songs we learned is one that the Koreans used to sing, that hadi-o, 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 whatever it is.
Arira. Yes.
Harida, harida, haradio. And in the post part of this, I got the story of my sister with the little Korean boy that I saved, and why she took the orphans in and so forth. And I think that'll be easily understood, you know.
Yeah.
Either I called her and said something about a teleconference, but I think probably an email. It's something when I've given her your email, and
Yes.
I think she'll respond to that because she can really type.
Wayne, I can come over, I can come back here when you can organize enough number of Korean War veterans for the interview. I can come back anytime, okay?
Yeah.
And when I come back, I'll meet your sister, okay?
Yeah.
But Wayne, I want to ask this question. This interview is supported and sponsored by the Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs.
Yeah.
It's a VA office in Korea.
Yeah.
For the very special occasion of 70th anniversary of the breakout of the Korean War, June 25th, 1950. Now it's been already 70 years.
Yeah.
And do you want to see this war ended and end the ceasefire and put it on? So closing the war. Do you want to see that?
Yes, we had a meeting of the Veterans Council down at the American Legion, and the governor was there and so forth. And he says to me, "What is your wish about the Korean War?" I said, "My wish is that there could be a signing of peace in one country." Because I met a lot of North Korean refugees, and it was terrible. And I still can remember a bridge being blown up over the river in Seoul, and there were a lot of civilians on there trying to get over. But the thing that I remember the most, the day that I left Korea, that visit, was in a tower in Seoul, like a Space Needle in Seattle, and you could look down and see 7 bridges crossing the river, and it's like a longitudinal park. I walked that park for the whole 7 bridges, and not a cigarette butt or a piece of paper or anything. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I said, from that Space Needle, there were 200 of us there. You could not hear a pin drop looking at that site. It was just unbelievable.
Wayne, I want to ask this question. You didn't know much about Korea before you left for Korea.
Nothing. I can't even remember anything in geography.
Exactly. But you went back to Korea 2000 and you couldn't believe your eyes that you were seeing at the time. What would you say to the Korean people, okay, in this special occasion of the 70-year-old war, still not replaced with the peace treaty? What would you say to the Korean people?
I would say, keep your courage. You will find peace by uniting.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Wayne, any episode that you think you have to share with me in this interview, what would you say? What is the episode that you want to say to me?
It seems that I'm talking to Kim Hawk, who was my favorite Katusa.
Uh-huh.
And we were very close together. He would draw pictures, and we would talk. And the one thing that was so funny, I had a Saturday Evening Post, and I showed him a picture, and he read that. And he says, Puck, he used to call me Puck. He says, I no understand you people in the country. He says, you poop in the house and you cook outdoors.
Yeah.
Oh, there were some great people, some good memories and bad memories.
Any other story that you didn't share with me so far yet, but you want to?
Well, the other thing with my Katusas, they'd like to make a little fire with grass, and they'd have a little piece of, they said, like chicken, and here, Puck, have some. I ate it, and it was pretty good, pretty good. About a week later, this turkey buzzard was flying around, and he says, Puck, chicken. And my sister, she can cook all she makes good kimchi.
Mm-hmm.
And she does all the cooking, you know. And when I went back to Korea, the other thing that I found over in the Chorwan Valley, we stayed at a place that was supposed to be where the people would go for vacations and so forth. They had hot springs there. And you could go in the hot spring and it had up to 102 degrees water.
Hmm.
And I said, why didn't they ever tell us that when our feet froze and we're cold, you know? And so I still see and I picture that the last train that went from South Korea to North Korea, it's right at the border there on the side.
Hmm.
And I said, someday those rails are going to run again.
Someday, hopefully soon.
Yeah, yeah.
Wayne, I want to thank you for your fight for the Korean people, because you fought so that opportunity was given to the Korean people,
Yeah.
so that they can rebuild their nation. And now it's the 11th largest economy in the world.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's an amazing story.
It sure is.
Yeah, and we need to tell this to the teachers and students for our younger generation. That's why we are doing this interview,
Yeah.
and we are publishing the book.
Yeah,
So if you can organize more interviews for me later this year, I can come back, okay?
but you know, there's only two of us left here.
Only two?
Two.
There are no more?
No,
No more Korean War veterans here?
two.
Only two? Oh, I'm so sorry. And also,
We're all the same age, you know,
yeah,
89 years old, and we got one World War II veteran,
yeah.
and I ride with him in the parade. He has a new Buick, and I ride with him. He said, you know, Wayne, he said, you tell me something about the Korean War, I read your book. He said, I feel so sad because he said, after World War II, we felt good. We said, well, this is the last war.
Yeah.
He says, they still continue.
Anything you want to say to me, again, about this interview, your service in Korea?
I'm very glad that you came and spent the time, and I wish you good future.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for your fight